Kia ora koutou katoa, and depending on where you are in the world, good morning or good evening. Thank you so much for joining our inaugural world-class New Zealand speaker series featuring Craig Bell, co-founder of Litissimo. My name is Mel Lim, Kia's Global Director of Partnerships and Engagement, and as part of my role, I have the absolute pleasure of looking after our world-class New Zealand community and hosting today's event. For those who aren't aware, Kia was founded over 20 years ago, at a time when many of our best and brightest were heading offshore for new opportunities. Our founders, Sir Stephen Tyndall and Professor David Teese, realised then that our offshore Kiwi are crucial to keeping New Zealand connected to the world. Over the years, Kia has continued to grow and nurture this community, and we now have almost 500,000 Kiwi across 185 different countries. A vital component of this community is our world-class New Zealand network, a unique group of individuals involved in world-leading and inspiring work that creates positive change. They are also passionate advocates for Aotearoa and actively give back to our people and businesses. So we've created this speaker series to not only highlight the incredible stories of these individuals, but to inspire others to push the boundaries of their own business goals and expectations. We are hugely appreciative of our world-class New Zealanders who always make the time to connect, share their insights, experiences, and personal networks to help others achieve the same success. I know there are several world-class New Zealanders attending this webinar today, so I'd like to acknowledge all of you and say a big thank you from Kia for all your continued support. Finally, a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you have any questions for Craig, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens, and we will leave some time at the end for questions. So, I'd now like to welcome our speaker today, Craig Bell. For those who don't know Craig is a Kiwi who's been living in Brazil for almost 25 years. He believes the most important challenge for businesses is to make a dollar and a difference. It's through this lens, he's determined to find ways to leave his adopted country of Brazil a better place than he found it, whilst also continuing to build his groundbreaking South American dairy business, which was based around traditional New Zealand pasture-based farming practices. Thank you so much for joining us, Craig. Good morning.
Good morning, bem-vindo, and it's a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you. So I thought to kick things off, I'll start with a couple of questions. So to begin, could you talk a little bit about the business model at Litissimo and what inspired you to get started?
Sure, Mel. Well, a little bit of a history. I arrived in Brazil actually with the New Zealand Dairy Board via Wellington and Mexico and a fair bit of time in the dairy industry. And I was managing the Mercosur region. And while I was here, I kind of couldn't help but notice that there was a reasonably large opportunity to do something in Brazil back at the farm level and in the processing industry. And that was driven by a couple of things, really. One was quality, like the quality of raw milk was and still is kind of low compared to New Zealand standards. And when you have, coming from a kind of the technical side of the industry, I know pretty well that if you haven't got good quality raw milk, you just can't make a good quality, dairy product. So we thought there was an opportunity to do something around the quality angle. And then with a bit more work and a bit more thinking, we realized that there was actually a big productivity gap here too. And by that, I mean, the farms are so small that the kind of the operating cost structure is really high as a result of the low productivity that they have. That's labor productivity and cow productivity. So we, when I say we, I mean literally we put together a group. I had the great fortune to meet a wise old Kiwi called David Wallace. And David's a dairy farmer from the Waikato. And he's retired now from actually farming. He's nudging 80, but him and his son, Simon, and myself sat down one day after doing a couple of years of looking around, and we kind of mapped out what we saw could be an activity system to take advantage of these two arbitrages, a cost arbitrage and a quality arbitrage. And cutting a long story short, sorry if I'm going on a little bit.
No, take it.
No, well, we figured out that the only way to kind of execute and take advantage of these things was to vertically integrate, and not buy milk from third parties. So one of the big trade-offs we made was we said we're only going to process milk that we control in order to preserve quality in the downstream. So it's a classic trade-off. Michael Porter would say, strategies choosing what not to do. And we chose not to buy milk from third parties, even though we could have. So yeah, that's what we did. And then we spent, once we had the idea, we then took about a year and a half of research on the ground here in Brazil. Simon, he borrowed my Volkswagen Golf and went to own it 100,000 kilometers down dirt roads. And that was the last I ever saw of my Volkswagen Golf. We joke about it until today. But literally we spent 18 months finding the right climate in the right state with the right water and all the right documents, which is so important here as well. And then we set about firstly building a farm, and then after about 10 years, putting in place milk processing. So we manufacture UHT milk and UHT cream, as well as these days it's yogurt and ice cream also, using our raw material, but in a factory closer to Sao Paulo. If anyone wants to have a look at what we're doing, I think we can probably put a couple of links up on our websites, www.lechissimo.com.br and www.delacari.com.br, and maybe even a little video link we have in English later if anyone's interested. Yep. What we also thought was, like the first clause in our shareholders agreement is actually what you'd probably call ESG today, environmental, social governance. But 20 odd years ago, we literally wrote into our shareholders agreement that we wanted to do things that were commercially productive, but we also wanted to set great examples on animal welfare, social development, and environmental management. So on our farm, we decided to use maximum 40% of the area that we bought, leaving ecological corridors that we designed with biologists and all the brightest minds we could find, because we're right next to a national park. So we decided to do that. And then over time, what we've done is we've built a community. Literally, we built 50 houses and a school and a couple of football fields and recreation areas, and we've last few years we've put in things like, we've actually got fiber optic Wi-Fi into the farm, or fiber optic cables for internet with a bit of Wi-Fi going on, so that everybody who's living and working with us can kind of enjoy the wider world that rural communities often couldn't do in the past. And I know that coming from Purua in Northland, which was Wrigley lost power when I was a kid, and telephone lines didn't work occasionally, and often we got flooded out and so on. So I can relate to how nice it is for people to have that kind of development. And then so we've grown over time. We now farm we produce about 25 million litres of milk per year. Wow. And we process all that into UHT cream and milk, as I said.
Amazing. So just kind of picking up on the theme of creating a positive community. So you shared that you've built facilities for them, from housing to, I think you mentioned to us earlier when we spoke around building a school to increase the education levels of your employees and their families, and creating solar powered healthy homes for them. So could you tell us a little bit more about the challenges you encountered when you first started out on this mission and how you overcame them?
Sure. Where we went was in the south of the west of Bahia. And if you're looking at a map of Brazil and you look at the city of Brasilia, the capital city, if you go kind of northeast at 360 kilometers, that's about where we are. And it was very remote. There was literally nothing there. The roads were just dirt roads. There was no electricity, there was no, anything, no housing. We went into an area that was very underdeveloped, and the local communities never really had the opportunity to have education. So Mumbai in Goiás is the nearest town to us, 45 kilometers away. The issues in Mumbai in the last 60 years were dealing with Chagas disease. I don't know if anyone knows Chagas disease, but it's caused by a parasite, I think a bacteria that's in the dirt. And so when houses have dirt floors, this nasty thing gets into your body, and at about the age of 40 or 45, your heart suddenly expands and basically runs up against the rib cage and you die. So Chagas disease, the research was done right next to our area. And so you can imagine that the area was kind of poor and struggling. Older people in our area are generally quite short because there wasn't enough protein in the diet. So coming forward through the decades, the issues were kind of staying alive and then getting enough calories, and then with time getting some quality calories in the diet, and then education was the one after that. So when we kind of turned up, virtually no one could read or write in the town. All the guys that we hired, I think the maximum anyone had of schooling was like 2 years of primary school. So we thought we better do something about this. So we built a school, actually not for kids, but for the adults that were working with us initially. And we didn't have any kids living on the farm for a start because we just didn't have the infrastructure. But with time, we got families out there. So on the social development side, Mel, what we did was we got a school, and we sorted out literacy for adults and young adults, basically. And then we wanted stability in our business as well. So we wanted to get people living out on the farm, families, like we would see in a rural community in New Zealand. And to do that, we put in, good schooling, got people confident that the quality of the schooling was good. And then it became a bit of a snowball, and then everybody wanted to come, of course, which was another issue we had to deal with, as to how do you handle people wanting to come from 50 kilometers away to your school?
Yeah.
So that was a challenge, getting that whole development and pulling, I wouldn't say pulling people up, but helping them up, giving them a bit of a step up in life was a challenge for sure, because we see that on the human side. That's a really key part of our business. On the actual kind of implementation of the business, we had challenges with genetics. So we had to overcome that. We started with what we could buy in Brazil, and then we've just used artificial insemination using 100 years of selection out of New Zealand to get close to a Kiwi cross cow, for all those farmers out there. And the initial challenge was actually finding the right place. If I go back to the start, the amount of time we spent on the ground finding the right place, I think 18 months. We sat tight, we stayed calm. We went and visited, 400 properties and to find the right place. And I'll touch wood and say I think we did. But patience was a challenge. It was a challenge getting documents. Land titles in Brazil are not like New Zealand. If the previous owner has a debt with somebody else and sells the land to you, you might be liable for that debt, right? So it's complicated when you're buying and selling land in Brazil, because there's no kind of necessarily clean title, and you've got to dig back into the past a bit. And then the challenges have been a little bit more physical, like electricity. We still struggle with quality of electricity. So we have to have multiple layers of risk management to deal with that. In fact, we're just doing another round in that whole area, and we're putting in some pretty sophisticated energy stabilization systems at the moment. And what else would I say? I think those are the main challenges that we had, Mel, getting going.
Yeah, just a few small hurdles.
Well, keeps life interesting, doesn't it?
Exactly. It comes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah.
And then kind of taking it back to the people side of things. So why was building community such an important thing for you? As you were building the business, why was the people side of things such a passion project for you?
Yeah, well, in the introduction, you picked up a line that I kind of repeat to people. I think making $1 in business is not that hard, frankly. What's actually harder is making a dollar and a difference. And you know, at the age of 32, I had the choice of kind of doing this, what I've done in my life with this, or carrying on down the corporate kind of path and excuse me, you know, carrying on in a traditional kind of corporate role. But I think I read a book called The Empty Raincoat, if anyone remembers that, and David Wallace recommended it, by the way, of course. And you know, that really got me thinking as a young guy about, you know, what is life all about, and certainly the triple bottom line, as they called it back then, to do something a little bit different. And I think, you know, when I look back at what we've done, it's good to see the lift in social development. It's good to see you know, what we've been able to achieve in terms of living standards and education, and you know, some of the kids that have come through our school are now going off to university, and hopefully they come back and, you know, join us in some role perhaps, but doesn't matter if they don't. And I think the other key thing for us is we recognized that for our business to succeed, we needed a community to succeed also. We couldn't depend, you know, farming cows is different to driving tractors in a cropping sense. A lot of the cropping guys labor lives in a nearby town and then just comes out on a bus during the day, drives the tractors and goes home. We know that in farming, to produce milk, you know, pasture-based dairy farming, that doesn't really work. So to have great performance back at our own operation, it was in our natural interest also to build a great community. And Simon Wallace is the guy who really deserves all the credit for that. By the way, he's on the front line living in Bahia. I'm based in Sao Paulo. We talk all the time, but Simon is the guy who has really led that charge. Of course, we, you know, do everything in consultation and tandem, and we come up with ideas between us all the time. But, you know, if I'm going to give credit where credit's due, I'm going to say, you know, Simon he's the man.
That's amazing. It's really great to see someone who looks at both business as well as the human side of things. So taking it back to the business side of things and looking at New Zealand, in your view, what are the key things New Zealand companies or Kiwi companies should consider if they are thinking about or looking to enter the South American market?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. Yeah, that's a kind of a long bow you've drawn there. That question now. I think firstly, we can't. LATAM's a nice, you know, kind of short word, that Latin America and so on. But there's huge diversity within Latin America. There's you know, there's kind of extreme wealth and extreme poverty, and there's well-run countries and poorly run countries, and incredibly controlled economies, and so I think you have to do your research around which bit of Latin America you're talking about first and foremost. That's one thing I'd say. Don't treat Latin America as if it's all the same, because it's not. And even within Brazil, you know, the difference between, say, Sao Paulo and Salvador, it's chalk and cheese inside this country. It's I don't know what the analogy would be in New Zealand, but it's just so different in terms of customs and music, culture, income, you name it. You know, there's a lot of differences. We speak Portuguese, but we're quite different, you know, countries or states, you know. So yeah, I think there's another thing I'd say that I've noticed with a lot of Kiwi companies coming over here is they kind of get a little bit frustrated because I think it's just going to be a bit like New Zealand, but it's not. The bureaucracy is totally different. You know, there's if you think there's an excess of bureaucracy in New Zealand, then think again. This place is it'll weigh you down if you don't go in with a calm mind and realize that that's just how it is, and you just have to deal with it. And I think what I'm reading, New Zealand's getting a little bit worse apparently, based on some of the things I'm reading in the media around the bureaucracy side of things. But still, Brazil's not an easy place to do business in. So keep your eyes wide open on that. I think learning the language is incredibly important. I just saw a question pop up.
Yeah,
that was divine timing, wasn't it? Look, yeah, you just invest the time to learn the language. Portuguese is not a difficult language to learn, I don't think, and it is worth doing. The richness of your engagement with people and your ability to manage is so much better if you can communicate, with everybody here. Patience is another thing. We spent 18 months just researching, and we were prepared to invest and be patient to do that, knowing that we'd found a pretty good thing to do. There's another question I see just popped up here. What changes have you seen in Brazil's business economy? I can pick that up now. We can pick it up later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you want to pick it up now, that's...
Yeah. So in terms of, Kiwi companies looking at Brazil, I'd say what I've seen is the long-term general trend is definitely GDP per person in real terms getting better and better and better. If you take a 25-year view, if you take a 5-year view, it's a bit messy because we've had a recession and then COVID and things aren't so great there. But overall, the trend is still very positive around where this place is going. I think there's a little bit of I know New Zealand's a long way away, and the type of reporting we get in New Zealand is kind of, there's carnival and they're burning down the Amazon, and there's not much more than that. What they're missing is some of the stories here that really matter, like how Brazil has got half the emissions per person of China, how it's got a third of the emissions of CO2 of New Zealand, and has got a sixth of the emissions of CO2 per person of Australia.
Yeah.
And how have they done it? Well, 50% of the gasoline we use here is already renewable, has been for ages. The whole of the Northeast is running on solar power at the moment, and solar and wind runs the whole of the Northeast, 50 million people. And that's happened in just the last 5 years. So this kind of stuff you don't really see in the media too much, because I guess it doesn't, it's not the sensationalist kind of stories, but the economy, the real economy here is really powerful. Agriculture is a machine here. There's a good reason that Brazil is the biggest exporter of chicken, soybean, and beef in the world. And it's not just that rain falls out of the sky and lands cheap or something like that. The sophistication of the value chains here are pretty awesome. I have a lot to do with the chicken industry as well, and another business that I'm involved with. And you stand back in awe at some of the things they're doing, and you can see why they're winning the game worldwide.
Yeah.
So patience, learn the language, don't be put off by bureaucracy, documents, that kind of stuff. Those are the kind of the key messages I'd leave. And don't treat Latin America as if it's all kind of the same. It's very different.
Yeah. Well, I can see a couple more questions coming through. So if anyone else on the webinar has any questions, feel free to submit it either through the chat or through the Q&A function. But I see here a question from Merrin, kind of following on, I suppose, from what you were just saying. What are your thoughts on how to do intensive or industrial dairy farming versus pasture-based in an environmentally friendly way? And then following on from that, do you think New Zealand should be cautious about going further down the industrial farming route? Big question.
Big question. Put me on the spot a bit. Well, we've voted with our feet, haven't we? So I'll declare my interest in grass for a start, obviously. When you stand back with and actually analyze the value chains, I think there's a number of reasons why we prefer grass. Actually, we're carbon negative. We're fixing more carbon in the soil than the cows are emitting as methane, or we're using for processing and transport of milk by about a factor of 3. So every litre of milk we produce, we're actually fixing 3 kilos of CO2 in the soil. That's not forever. We know that. That's because the soils we started with had no organic matter in them, and we're building organic matter in the soil. So for about 40 to 50 years, we think that we'll actually be carbon negative, and then it'll be kind of neutral. And then we will be having to offset probably after about that period. But we'll start on that earlier. I think on the grass versus industrial milk, I'll start with a nutritional angle. If you look at vitamin A, if you look at conjugated linoleic acid, if you look at vitamin K, grass-based milk has 5 times more of these things than confinement-based systems. And, those are very important components for human health. The fatty acid profile is better from milk coming from grass. So I think from a pure nutritional point of view, it's better. I think from a cost point of view, grass is a better system as well. It comes with more challenges in a way, but letting the cows do a lot of the work for you. We say the cow is our tractor, but letting the cow do a lot of work. We have a productivity factor that's a lot higher than the average confinement-based farm in Brazil by maybe 3 times, in fact. So we produce 1,500 litres per person per day, and that is roughly 3.5 times, good confinement farm in Brazil. Now, it could be more, it could be better in the United States or in New Zealand, where there's a bit more sophistication and a few more robots and things like that. But I do think that from a cost point of view, grass is cheaper than confinement feeding, and it's the best place to go. So I'm definitely a fan of letting pasture do, be the food, if you like, for the cow, rather than letting grain. And I think New Zealand would make a bit of, we're not a natural place to have confinement farming in New Zealand, because what are you going to feed the cows? We're not a massive cropping country. We don't have a lot of, advantages in doing that. And I'd kind of say, stick to the grass.
Great advice.
Grass-based, yeah, grass-based, not 100% grass, by the way. Just as a side note, we did look at organic, by the way, as an option. Yeah. And we decided not to be an organic farm for a couple of reasons. One was how to treat mastitis. At least back when we started, it looked a bit cruel on cows because there wasn't a good mastitis treatment. And also, but a bigger one that we thought about was the productivity and the amount of area you'd need to produce the same amount of milk, and also the enteric fermentation relative to milk production that you get from an organic system versus a system that's grass-based. And that's why we opted to be grass-based and actually use fertilizer to intensify in a smaller area to preserve a larger area outside our area. So we looked at it and we thought organic was, when you get into meat and milk, organics get a little bit dodgy in terms of, emissions to output from our calculations. Maybe some other people have got different views, but that's how we saw it, at least.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's really interesting. I'm just looking through a few other questions here. So how important are the right connections? Is it like New Zealand, where who is a real advantage? If so, how would you suggest a business in New Zealand go about making those connections on the ground in South America?
I wouldn't say it's too much about who you know, because this country is so big that it's not kind of stitched up. Chile, I'd agree. Chile's kind of run by a dozen families or 20 odd families run more or less Chile, but Brazil, no. Brazil's too big and too diversified, and I think it's about building your own network in order to play your place in whatever idea you've got. And so yeah, not really. We don't rate connect. We're friendly with everybody. We're apolitical. We don't back any political party. We're friendly to everybody, and we're open with everybody, and that's how we play it. And that's all you need to do, really.
Yeah, Great. Not the 2 degrees of separation within New Zealand,
No.
our village.
Yeah.
I've got a question here around the dollar and your philosophy around dollar and a difference. So basically, looking at ESG before it became a thing. So Darren has asked what you have learned in promoting this concept and persuading people that might have been cynical or maybe just anxious about such an outlook or approach.
Well, firstly, it's very much an internal philosophy for us. It's not something that we externalize a lot. And we do talk about our shareholders agreement and how we have written in our first clauses exactly those things around animal welfare and social development and environment. I think I don't make a point of ramming this down other people's throats, and I think it's better to just keep it that way. But my close friends that I have who have come to the farm with me, and guys from Sao Paulo that I socialize with, they kind of absorb it and then they get it without us having to say anything, and they see what's going on. And the moment they get it often is when they go to the school, and they look at the classroom and they see the engagement and they see the creativity and they see what's going on. We had the Financial Times come up and do an article on us, and that was the kind of the drop dead moment for the reporter when he saw this is okay. I get it now. I get what you guys are doing, and I do think it's horses for courses but building a community for us was kind of fundamental for our business as well, right? So it was a marriage made in heaven in that sense.
Yeah. End of the day, you need the people to drive your business and be a part of it.
Sure.
So that actually leads to another question here that I see from Jody. I'm interested in the social side of your organization. How did you upskill yourself to address the challenges in your local community?
Right. Well, we learned how to build stuff first and foremost. So building, you don't just go and build 45 kilometers down a dirt road a house. You've got to learn how to do it properly. So Harry, who's another Kiwi who came out with Simon, Geraldo is his Brazilian name. He and Simon and me to a lesser degree, we've figured out how to build great living conditions at a low cost. Second, and then also, we learned how to maintain our own power lines and how to maintain our own telecoms. There was just nobody else there to do it. So we were the power board, and we were Telecom New Zealand, or whatever they're called these days. Spark, yeah. So we had to learn how to do all that stuff, and we assembled a team with complementary skill sets. So we've got electricians and mechanics and IT specialists all inside our network now. So we can solve pretty much any problem we think coming at us. On the education side of things, we were a little bit lucky in that David Wallace's wife was a retired school teacher, and she was very helpful. Juliet was very helpful with convincing some of her old colleagues to come out for sabbaticals and have a bit of an experience and stay for a year or so and help us get the school going. And that was a big help in terms of getting our schooling program going. So it was a little bit of luck there. If anyone else is thinking of doing this kind of things, I'd say find yourself there's a lot of, we've discovered a lot of great school teachers in New Zealand who've kind of finished their career, still got a bit of gas in the tank, want to do something in an interesting place. You can knock on the door, 3 or 4 phone calls, and you can find some really, really talented people to help you get going on this kind of stuff. So yeah, those are the main things that we had to figure out: infrastructure, education, and how to keep stuff working in a very remote location.
Yeah. So literally
we have we are one of the highest lightning density places in the world, by the way. We have a lot of lightning. So you can imagine that we have to be good at fixing stuff. Yeah. We had to learn how to fix stuff.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that plays into the whole number 8 Kiwi, number 8 Y mentality that Kiwis are so famous for. So there's another question here around business trends. So what are the business trends that you are seeing emerging in Latin America for next year and beyond?
Yeah, well, I think I'll speak from a little bit from the industries that we're involved in. What we're seeing is a lot more D2C, distribution to consumer. We're seeing kind of even the micro distribution centers, so many small distribution centers scattered around the city with last mile delivery on electric vehicles happening. So I'm seeing the whole retail area, the whole retail space kind of getting turned on its head a little bit. You know, the traditional supermarkets have been migrating into either cash and carry, which services the wholesale area as well as a bit of retail, or they're having to go up market to kind of real, like your Faroes of New Zealand, if you like. And people who aren't doing either of those two things are kind of getting caught a little bit because these other models are coming in with, you know, direct to consumer delivery. So that's kind of a big trend happening here. The renewable energy space is huge over here. That's has been going on for a while, and wind and solar is just picking up. So I think we're looking at a little bit of that ourselves at the moment. We have 2,800 hours of sunshine per year, you know, so it's probably a good place to do something. But we're seeing a lot of interest in that space, a lot of projects. The Italians in Nel are investing heavily in this area in Brazil. And what else? What other trends that I'm saying? Those are probably a couple of big ones that come to, you know, my mind straight away.
Some big industries there to cover as well. And then kind of following on from that, what are the advantages of investing in a country like Brazil compared to New Zealand? So for the investors out there, what are the investment opportunities?
Well, it's firstly, you know, eyes wide open is a riskier place to be than New Zealand for sure. It's you know, you can see that in the country risk and any kind of standard banking stuff you look at. But having said that, it's 220 million people. It's a market size. For us, it was a market size and ability to execute discussion. You know, we could have gone to New Zealand and we would have paid huge amounts for land in a tiny little market. Whereas coming over here, we had, you know, huge market, and our ability to enter was kind of wide open because the frontiers, if you like, of to be able to execute what we're doing are enormous. The areas that are available to do things in agriculture are still huge, you know. So I think it is a little bit of, you know, a small village, or do you want to you know, go for something a bit bigger? We actually looked at Uruguay, we looked at Argentina, we looked at Chile also before we settled on Brazil. Just a little bit of background. We thought Argentina had too much climate risk and too much political risk. And we thought Uruguay had too much climate risk. We just weren't convinced by anything in Uruguay. It's stuck in the middle climatically speaking. And Chile was kind of a bit more the same as New Zealand, but a very small market and geographically isolated really compared to you know, what we could execute here with a consumer brand. So yeah, those are the trade-offs really.
Yeah.
It is more difficult to execute here, I think. Although my dairy farming colleagues in New Zealand tell me that there's so much red tape to run a dairy farm these days in New Zealand, it's not so easy there anymore either. But
yeah, there's still challenges over here as well.
Yeah, apparently.
I've got a question here from Tony Falkenstein. Have you had any problems with theft, corruption, or dishonesty in general?
We've had a little bit of trouble with petty theft.
Mm.
So I think when we spoke last, Mel, I just told you I just got back from Junjai. We'd had our main electrical cables stolen, cut out and stolen, and we've, to steal, I don't know, a couple of $100 worth of copper or something. So that's kind of annoying and petty. We've had a little bit of that at the farm. We had a couple of transformers that people put a rope around and pulled off the pole to steal the copper inside, but that stuff's kind of small in the overall scheme of things. We try to design systems to stop it, but in terms of corruption, no. In terms of dishonesty, very little, if any. One or two very minor things. Brazilians are generally pretty hardworking. I think it comes back to the culture that you set also. So setting the right kind of performance metrics, if you like, or expectations of standards right from day one, and living by those, you get more people pulling on your side of the rope than are trying to pull on the other side of the rope, and naturally your organization runs a lot better. And we do design things so that the chances of stuff happening is kind of reduced as well. But no, in general, and from the government, no, we've not had any of that, perception of corruption. Just no, we've not run into it.
That's really good.
In fact, the only theft that I've personally suffered while I've been in Brazil, when I was flying out of Berlin airport.
Oh.
I've never had anything stolen from me in Brazil. And the only time I've ever had anything stolen while I've been living in Brazil was when I was flying through Berlin, believe it or not.
Yeah. Just a pickpocket on the way through.
Yeah, well, it was a briefcase, so it was a bit annoying.
Oh, wow. And final question to round everything off. Were there any times when it got really hard and you thought about giving up? And I suppose to put a more positive spin to end things, what got you through?
Well, we've had hard times, and they're generally driven by either biological or market events. So we're kind of growing at about 25% organically, and then you might get a spanner thrown in the works a little bit. So then you suck deep at, like, this year's been a tough year for us here in Brazil because of kind of the repercussions of COVID and the marketplace, and we don't expect things to get better until about March of next year. But no, we've never thought of giving up, and I can't ever remember one discussion around our board table where let's throw the towel in, it's too hard, or this is just no. And I think what gets us through it is a belief in what we were doing that we talked about before around those three things in our shareholders agreement. Making a difference via doing the right thing by animal welfare, by the environment, by social development, and the challenge for me and Simon and the other directors of the company is, all right, if things are a bit tough, let's figure out how to bridge through this until we come out the other side, and then we set ourselves up for the next wave of development. That's kind of how I feel about it, at least.
There are always going to be bumps in the road.
I think business is not linear. That's one thing I'd say. Business is not linear, and nothing is in this world. So you just have to believe in your activity system. And we love the thinking of blue ocean strategy, and I had the great fortune at INSEAD to be exposed to a lot of that. And we love the thinking of activity systems from Michael Porter. So designing your business right from the start to be very resilient, I think, is one thing that helps you get through tough moments also.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm just conscious of the time, and I can see we've got a minute to go. So to quickly wrap things up before we close the session, Craig, I just wanted to say ngā mihi nui. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and insights with us today. It's been really interesting learning about your journey and all the fantastic opportunities as well for Kiwi businesses that still lie ahead in South America. To all of our guests, thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session. A recording of this webinar will be available on the Kiwi website shortly. And we'll continue to run these events throughout 2022. So if you've got any feedback or any suggestions of speakers that you'd like to hear from, please let us know via the short survey that will be at the end of the session. So thank you, Craig. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day. Haere rā. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.